So Jared, thank you for putting this together. I wanted to recognize Jared White, who helped very much with putting together these slides. He works at Parks and Recreation. And other key members of the park staff that have been very involved in Bachman Lake are Leon Lim, who is the senior project manager that is kind of overseeing the skate park project, and Jason Ney, who has had a lot of involvement as well with the Greenbelt. So thank you both of you for joining. And Jared, if you can go ahead and move forward to the next slide. Thank you. So the Greenbelt, as most of you know, since you're probably neighbors, and this meeting is really honing in on a Greenbelt update. This is the first time we've really done this detail of an update on the Greenbelt itself. It is directly to the east of Lemmon Avenue. It is a beautiful, beautiful area, very quiet and gorgeous, as most of you know. We're going to go through the background of what initiated kind of the work and why Friends of Bachman Lake got involved. We're going to describe the kind of the scope of the effort as well as the schedule. If you can go to the next slide, Jared. So the area, as you know, Bachman Creek cuts through the Greenbelt. There's a north side and a south side. Inclusive of the creek, the area is between 30 to 40 acres. There's a huge amount of wildlife, and as you may have seen over the last several decades, I've lived in the area for about 26 years. It has become more and more impassable due to the invasive privet. In addition to that, last year when we tried to do a walk through the area, and this was spring of 2019, it was really impassable. We couldn't get through, and in addition to that, we encountered a large number of tents. There's a homeless encampment in there, and that is really because it is so secluded. So this has become kind of even from a water contamination perspective an issue, and just it really takes away from the ability, the fact that it's so overgrown, the ability of the community to really enjoy this area. If you can move to the next slide, Jared. These are some slides. These are some photos. On the image on the left is basically what, I don't know that it's necessarily Blackland Prairie, but it's definitely an open space. It's an open prairie that is on the easternmost edge of the Greenbelt on the north side of the creek. The image on the right is of the creek itself. This is more towards the Lemmon Avenue side. I don't know if you were aware that there is a small, what are they, ash grove in the area. And so one of our concerns as we're looking to really preserve the Greenbelt is how do we make sure the ash grove is protected from what is it called? It's a green beetle that is a borer that is killing ash trees, and you have to treat them to make sure that they're not infected. So it's something really special. We walked the area with our city biologist, and he is the one that alerted us to the fact that there was the ash grove. Granted, we couldn't see the full area because it was so overgrown. If you can move to the next slide, Jared, thank you. This is an example of the homeless encampments that we encountered in the Greenbelt. This is right along what would have been the trail. Part of the scope of the effort will be not just to remove the tents, but all of the trash that is surrounding the tents. And once again, this was a year ago. I have no idea what we're going to encounter this time around as we go through and try to clean it up. So there's also a significant amount, as you can imagine, of poison ivy, and this is going to be another factor that we're going to contend with as we look at the cleanup. Next slide, Jared. So and I have a lot of you to thank, because not just I, but Friends of Bachman Lake, I apologize. As a friend of the lake, you helped us raise $40,000 in a major fundraiser in November of last year. And this community input meeting is the next step that we have in order to secure a match from the city of Dallas of $40,000. We're extremely excited about this. We think that this is going to be it's really going to enhance the area and make it safer and more secure. The development of the trails, there's going to be a loop on the north side of about 1 mile and a loop on the south side of about 1 mile. Unfortunately, we don't have the exact designs, because once again, we weren't able to take it through and actually see the area. So a lot of what we have worked on with Groundwork Dallas has been based on satellite imagery. So the work that we're going to do, Groundwork Dallas is a nonprofit organization. I see Rick has just joined, so maybe I'm going to turn it over to him to describe. Jared, can you go to the next page? I don't know I forget what the order is.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Basically, Groundwork Dallas, you know that they're a nonprofit. We work with underserved youth, homeless, underserved, and international rescue youth. We teach them environmental education. We do a lot of cleanups on the rivers and drainage dishes in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We work with Parks and Rec to take parks that have, I'm not gonna call them neglected, but they weren't used and they weren't really updated, like Hines Park on Harry Hines Boulevard. And we put in benches, a deck, a trail around that park and the lake there. We're working in South Dallas with the code department to go in and clean up the vacant lots, and to kind of a beautification project for South Dallas, bring up the canopy of the trees, working with the residents in the neighborhood. A couple of weeks ago when we were down there, they threw us a barbecue Friday, the day we were completed, which was kind of cool. And we work with the water department down in the levee area to clean it up, and the Fraser Dam recreation area that we're building down there also. So, and then Susanna had approached me, I guess it's been a couple of years now, about going on the east side of Bachman Lake and taking that greenbelt and developing a trail system through there, along with removing the invasive species of Chinese privet. Which will be a multi-year project working with the Parks Department to prevent the erosion that may happen if we removed it all at once. So we're going to remove a third at a time over 3 years. The trail we're putting in, the first phase is going to be on the north side of the creek, and the second phase will be on the south side. I guess that pretty much touches all the bases, Susanna.
Thank you, Rick. I also thank you for that summary. I also see that Brett Johnson joined us. Brett is the city biologist. Brett, I was mentioning a little bit ago that that we have a small ash grove in the Greenbelt. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to some of the other species, or your observation of that Greenbelt area itself and why it's special.
You actually hit the main my main point of interest in that area is that little grove of ash trees that are in there. The other reason that particular area of the Greenbelt is interesting to me is if you go back and start looking at a lot of the old aerial photos, even going back into the 1930s, that's still one of the old stands of trees we've got in that portion of Dallas. And as such, we have to be watching them because a lot of the trees in that particular age class are starting to go into decline some. And so we just have to be out watching for them and planning for future tree plantings, maintenance work, and through that area.
Brett, could you explain what you had indicated in terms of the impact of privet on those old trees and the heat? I think you had talked about a heat.
Yeah, one thing about privet is it does have a value to some extent for helping reduce erosion because it gets those so thick. But the problem we run into with a lot of people think it's when we start removing it that we're removing habitat, and that's really not the case because, especially in the summer, when you've got a thick tree canopy over the top of privet, that privet releases a lot of moisture, which goes up and gets trapped under that tree canopy. And effectively, what you're creating is kind of almost like a pressure cooker effect. It's got a real high humidity in there, and there's actually very few birds and very few mammals that are going to hang out in that in the summer. So by removing that privet, we're actually helping wildlife habitat.
Thank you, Brett. I think that was fantastic. I couldn't exactly remember what the impact was of the privet, but I remembered it was not good. So we're going to take questions at the end. We're going to finish and getting all the input at the end of the meeting. I think we have maybe one or two more slides to go, maybe three. So from a project description perspective, as I had already mentioned, and you saw the pictures, the scope is going to be include a removal of the homeless encampments and the cleanup of the site. We will obviously do this in conjunction with code enforcement and homeless solutions, so that folks that are living in that area are taken care of. From a parking perspective, this was a question that we received from Park Board as the project was being reviewed. The intent is that parking for the North Trail will be at the future Quick Trip trailhead along Lemmon Avenue. Parking on the south for the South Trail is as it is today along Shorecrest Drive. So that would not, that is really not changing. Jared, if you can go to the next page, please.
Susanna, this is Calvert while we wait for Jared. Is there another entrance to the trail on either side except from the parking? Like from the Quick Trip trailhead, is that the only option to enter the trail? Like for those, okay, that's great. With the maps, like for the people who live on Cochran Chapel, is there going to be an inlet where they can enter between homes or in that cul-de-sac?
Yeah,
Entrance?
there's currently an access point on the cul-de-sac that is intended and will continue to be intended only for maintenance purposes. And that's where the mowing equipment is brought in, and so that's going to continue like that. In fact, as you look at the trail will kind of avoid that area in terms of it's not going to cut through it because we believe that there's an opportunity in the future to add more wildflowers maybe to that space and allow viewing from the trail to the wildflower section. But it is not, it's not going, there's not going to be parking on Cochran Chapel. The trail will connect on the eastern side to that asphalt trail that currently exists. And that is the trail that connects to what will be the QT trailhead. So on the north side, the parking will be off of the QT trailhead. Until that is completed, we don't necessarily have an answer. When we initiated this effort, the QT trailhead was supposed to have been done last summer. That's when the work was supposed to have been completed or started with completion in December. But they're continuing to face delays. In fact, the lady from Quick Trip was on the parks update in last month, and I believe that they are still working on getting their permit, and and the delays have been due to additional analysis that they've had to complete for flooding. And Jason, I know you're on the call. Do you have an estimate of when do you recall, because I can't, when she said they were targeting completion?
Well, they're still working on the permit, so they're hoping in a few months that they can get that permit in order to do the work. So the city's holding up their project as they go through the permitting process. They have to follow all the rules like everyone else.
Thank you, Jason. So Calvert, I don't know if that answered your question, but this is an aerial of the proposed trail line. And we obviously are very desirous of getting some input from folks on what you think of these loops. And you know the area if you have been living in the area for decades and are familiar or have walked it before. It would be great to sit down with you guys to say what would work or would not work so we can adjust these lines accordingly. So Jared, can you go to the next slide? I think that the next one's the last one, and then we'll just open it up for questions.
Real quick, those trail lines, those are only a guess based on map reconnaissance. When we go out and set them using a clinometer, that's actually going to set the lines in so we get the proper angles on.
Great, thank you for that. Today, obviously August 4th, community input meeting. We'll tweak and adjust any of these plans according to the feedback that we're getting. Groundwork Dallas, it would be targeting commencing work on site towards the end of October, looking to have the poison ivy hopefully die back by then. And they're looking at a 28-week schedule. This has been extended from our original plans due to COVID. The groundwork works, and Richard can speak to this better than I can, but it's very much all about volunteers and working with volunteers. And due to COVID, there's a lot of constraints in terms of how much work they're going to be able to do at a time. So we'll begin the removal of the privet. And as Brett mentioned and Richard already mentioned, complete removal of the privet will be a multi-year process because we don't want it to cause immediate erosion, and we're going to have to introduce other native species to help counter the removal of the privets. Happy to take any help from those of you out there that might be master gardeners or experts that want to lend a hand on how to and working with us on how to make this happen. And then we're looking, for spring to launch the trails. Our initial goal had been to have this done by the end of this year, but as I indicated with COVID, some of this has delayed, and I'm sure that you're understanding of that. So anyways, we'll go to the last slide and open it up for questions. Just unmute and go ahead and ask away.
Okay, Susanna, it's Calvert again. And maybe Richard from Groundworks can explain what's going to be the texture of the trails. Since they're nature trails, will they be like wood chips, or will they just be natural surface, like just soil, or what's kind of how do they interact with the natural landscape?
The trail is going to be a natural surface trail, which is how we build all of our trails in the city of Dallas. It'll be dirt. There will be a green space on each side. So the tread itself will originally be cut at 4 feet, the width of our bucket. And then we'll have a 2-foot green space on either side of that. And it'll actually be cut so that it's easily maintainable. When it has to, we can run lawnmowers over it. So the trail we always build trails to the beginner. So that it doesn't, it's not technical and they can't ride it or walk it or whatever they're going to do on that trail, but it's going to be built for everybody. And then the maintenance will be real fast based on the way we're going to design and build it. You can effectively just run a lawnmower through it and be done with it in a couple hours. And that's typically how we build these trails out, but they will be natural surface dirt trails.
Yeah, and I had a
Thank-
conversation on whether we could add wood chips, Calvert, similar to maybe what you see at the Audubon. The problem with that, it's kind of a pro and con from a maintenance perspective. Yeah, you may have a more beautiful Audubon, Dallas Arboretum feel to it, but it really impacts the ability and the level of maintenance and work, and really if we have big rains or we're going to run the mowers through there, it's going to just throw the chips everywhere. So it didn't feel like that was necessarily a good investment. I think we would rather put the money, instead of buying wood chips, maybe buying native plants, which we're going to have to fund.
And if it's going to be a multi-use trail and you're going to have bicycles allowed on this, you're not going to want something on that trail that they can slide out on.
Well, we don't, yeah, and that's, I think, a great point is we would want mainly walkers, but it's also not something that any of us will be able to necessarily control who is going to necessarily, there's probably going to be bikers. We have, Preston, giant Preston Hollow bikes right there at, right off the lake, which is fantastic. They might even start using it a little bit more. I think the more traffic that we have on the trail, the safer it will be. And it will dissuade homeless people from setting up camp. One of the items that I forgot to mention as we were talking about the scope is that we are going to add the safety call signage that exists around the Bachman Trail Loop. That's going to be added into the nature trails as well. And we will be putting in, some trash cans, and we hope to add to that, similar to what is on North Haven, doggy poop bags. That would be there as well. So you're probably wondering what is going to happen with the dollars that we are getting matched from the city of Dallas. There are a lot of limits in terms of how that money can be spent, because it was originally dollars that, and Calvert, you can correct me because I might be misstating this, dollars that were set aside for really capital investment. And as such, we have to abide as we get the match to the type of work that is considered to be capital. So we can't fund nature trails or things that don't have a 20-year life expectancy. So the idea is to leverage the dollars for signage maybe at the entrance at the QT trailhead, or maybe even at the trailhead on the South Lake side, to describe the type of wildlife that you will encounter in the nature trail. So it really becomes a different experience, which it is, from what you would get in terms of the loop around the lake, which is very much about aviation and very urban. You kind of go into this pristine, quiet area, and I think some signage to really give people an appreciation for what is there will be important. We have not designed that. We are going to be working. We've got some ideas in terms of some park amenities that we have seen elsewhere, but it hasn't been designed, and we'll be working through parks to get that coded and figure out how we go about getting it funded, but funded as part of the match.
It would be interesting if you could, highlight what people might be encountering, the different types of plants, the different kind of animals, insects, and make it educational for the kids. It's not that far from C.D. Williams. I mean, I don't know if DISD would be amenable to kids taking a nature walk down there to the area and a loop around. I mean, it could be very educational for elementary age kids, as well as all the neighborhood kids.
Yes, and that's exactly the idea, is to have that type of a description so that we can speak to the types of trees, and maybe even make it so, hey, make sure you look for these 20 things in the nature. These are the types of as you said, insects, animals, trees, plants that you'll encounter. So that's exactly the concept, yes.
Susanna,
I know those apartments are ever changing. I mean, they've been upgraded. I don't know how many kids live there off Northwest Highway, but and I agree with you. The more users we have, I think the safer the trail is going to be. I mean, it will discourage the homeless encampments as well as any nefarious activity happening if there's regular neighborhood users, looking after the area.
Susanna, a question did come up if any of the trails are going to be ADA accessible. So if anyone can answer to that.
Michael, they will, the access to the trail from QT will be ADA accessible. From the QT trailhead to the trail on the north side, there is asphalt, but after that, it's dirt. So, and until we get through, we cut through the privet and see what there is, I can't really make a commitment that, oh yeah, it's all pretty much accessible for a wheelchair, because we do not know what the gradations are going to be. So I think the answer right now is a portion of it will be, but we can't guarantee that all of it will be.
What about lighting?
That's a really good point. We were actually considering. I talked to Louise Elam, who was in charge of the design group at Parks, about can we add lighting. The challenge is then you have to run electrical, very expensive. So then I was thinking, well, what about solar? And I think there's an opportunity to continue doing those enhancements and having those conversations. Our concern for this first phase was doing the research to figure out, with the canopy that currently exists, would there be sufficient solar penetration to charge the lights? What we would like to do for the sake of consistency, because we know that DWU is going to be rebuilding the trail on the west side of the lake where the dam is, those lights we want to work with them to make sure that there's consistency in lighting, and see if they're going to be putting solar in, maybe we can partner and add the same type of lighting possibly in the Greenbelt. So we're hedging a little bit in terms of what is going to happen with DWU and the lighting there. How do we create consistency across the park? And I don't know if that's necessarily a good answer, but for now, the answer is no, there's not going to be lighting in what we build right now, but it doesn't mean that there won't be in the future.
And Susanna, I can at least add to that. We don't have lighting on most of our trails now throughout the system. We have about 170 miles of trails in the whole park system, and most of it is unlit. But we are going to soon begin a master plan for lighting. We would qualify for some grants potentially. So that is something we're looking at kind of park system wide. This is a little bit unique because you want to have that natural feeling. Of course, when you're on the nature trails, you don't want to have too much light pollution, certainly in the neighborhood, or where it's so bright on the trails that it would dissuade people from using it. But so that's something that we're going to be looking at, just, big picture. So, and did Louise say if that is lighting would not be included as a capital match?
It was an idea that we explored. We didn't go far enough down. We decided that what made the most sense in terms of the investment was the signage and using that from an educational perspective. And we felt that that was much easier to accomplish. And then, if you will, down the road, understand what DWU was going to be doing on the other side of the lake, and see if there was an opportunity to partner. Yeah.
Or even benches. I'm glad you mentioned the dog waste stations. We get a lot of those requests on North Haven, and so I'm glad that's being addressed as well. So thank you.
So I see a question from Don Word. Will there be any connectivity between the north and south trails? Don, we would love for there to be connectivity between the north and south trails, because the reality is that the access on Lemmon Avenue, I think the quote unquote sidewalk on Lemmon is 2 feet wide. It was built probably in the 70s, 80s, really without a concept of pedestrian use. So it's very dangerous to get over on that side. We would love to create some sort of connectivity between the north and south side. And I think that will be an item that we are going to have to work on over time and create, either raise funds or get somebody to help us sponsor that type of work. Because it is a flood, I want to say it's flood prone. I mean, there's a lot of water that comes down Bachman Creek. The height and span of that bridge will be pretty big. I mean, Rick and Brett and I, when we walked it, we realized that it wasn't as simple as the small bridges or the smaller bridges that you maybe see on the North Haven. This would have to span quite a bit more than that. And so I think that it'll require a lot more engineering than we would than what we think right now. So I don't know, Brett or Richard, if you recall that walk, if you want to add anything to that.
First thing I'd like to say is, as far as lighting on the trail, and since it's going to be a natural area, I don't know if that's a good idea and how it would affect nature until you've done a study. I know Brett's on the line. He might have some information on it. Brett, do you want to kick in on this?
Yeah, I put a comment over in the chat about it. Keep in mind, just kind of the city of Dallas was selected as one of the first Bird City, Texas designations. With that in mind, there are lighting issues or lighting methods we could look at, but the more you light up a natural area, the less wildlife and in particular birds like it. So just please keep that in mind.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Richard and Calvert. All very good input, and definitely the type of input that we're seeking so we make the right decisions. Scott Davis asked a question. He asked, is the $80,000 raised sufficient to complete the project, or will there be more fundraising? Also, what is the most expensive aspect of the project? So, Scott, to do the initial trails, we have sufficient money to cut through and remove the first phase of the privet. We do not have the full dollar amount to remove all of the privet in the Greenbelt. That would require additional fundraising over the years to do that work. So or a lot more volunteer effort to help with the privet removal over time. So we think that between those, we can accomplish the privet removal, but the reality is we don't have the full amount needed to cover 3 years worth of work by Groundwork Dallas to remove all the privet. We do have the funds to do the signage and the trails on both the north and the south side.
And Suzanne, in answer to your bridge, there's the potential of putting a bridge in. I believe it was on the east side, but we're not able to do metal. I mean, I build wood bridges all the time. I've done them for the parks at River Legacy. We've built 36-foot span bridges that are still standing and solid today. But I know that the Dallas Parks and Rec Department would rather it be made out of metal.
I do know somebody who told me they had a bunch of steel beams from the old records building in Dallas. So I might be able to get a hold of those, but we don't have the engineering. Oh, I do know somebody that builds bridges. I'll have to call and see if they would be willing to do some pro bono work. Anyways.
Can I chime in just a few seconds?
Yes, go ahead, Leon.
This is Leon Lim. Knowing that area is in a floodplain, and we ran into this same issue recently. The bridge has to be 2 feet above the flood elevation, 100-year flood elevation. So imagine that you have a bridge that's 2 feet over there, your abutment on both sides. Then you have to land it uh, outside the flood zone. So based on the floodplain map, you can look at and see where would you land, and it could be outside the city property, might land into a private property. I don't know. So you have to do some kind of analysis. And also we have to look at the floodplain, have to do a flood study to make sure that we're not blocking any water. You know, I know that on Shawcrest side, especially when it floods, even the street was underwater sometimes. So just keep that in mind. It is not impossible, but there are a lot of technical challenges, permitting issues.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I think it will be unlikely that we, in the next 10 years or so, would even consider probably having the funds to do a bridge on the Greenbelt site connecting the two nature loop.
mm,
I think it's more likely that maybe work could happen alongside Lemmon Avenue to create a pedestrian bridge that connects the north side so that the loops, even from a park perspective, are connected, or
mhm,
potentially having the Webb Chapel Bridge become pedestrian only, and through that have the ability to have a loop.
yeah,
So that a Webb Chapel concept would allow there to be a loop on both the Bachman Lake Park Loop Trail as well as going over to the nature side. So I think there's other spans that cross the creek and the lake that can already be leveraged if we're a little creative, and definitely would be maybe less expensive and address the considerations that you're raising, Leon, because I think those are really important points. Any other questions? Thank you so much for the ones that you've submitted so far.
How will it all be maintained?
So Toby, thank you for the question. Currently, the Parks Department already has and I know David Lopez is on the call. Thank you, David, for joining. David and I connected a little bit earlier this week, yesterday, and because there's already a team that mows the area in question, we are going to, once the trail is done, we're going to have to touch base with David, submit a request, figure out how the mowing is going to take place. But I think you heard the description, Toby. Richard indicated that it would be wide enough for one of their heavy duty, the Parks Department heavy duty lawnmowers to go through. So it's just, we're going to have to wait till they're done. But the idea is that twice a year within the schedule that the Parks Department currently has for maintenance of the area, that a special request would be submitted to make sure that the trail is covered as well. In addition to that, through the volunteering efforts that we would do once we're past COVID, we do have twice a year cleanup efforts that Friends of Bachman Lake coordinates. And we would love for there to be a dedicated team, maybe from the Cochran Chapel and Shorecrest neighborhoods, that really kind of help take care of those nature trails. We did that at our cleanup event last year, and I know the people that worked that area were, some of them had never really even been down by the creek, and they just felt they were in a different world, picking up the plastic bottles creekside, but just the beauty of it. So we think that both from a trash perspective, we can use the plogging events, the 2 times a year cleanup that we do, and then work with the Parks Department for the mowing, and then work with Groundwork Dallas to do kind of, if we need the more heavier duty stuff as we continue to expand and try to get rid of the privet. I do know that the ARIA apartment group, Adam Brown, he was not able to join us today. He worked very closely with Friends of Katy Trail and all the Reverchon area and apartments complexes that they had in the area to do cleanup. And he was envisioning helping his teams helping on the backside there of the Greenbelt alongside the apartment complex, so that that gets cleaned up as well. So I think if everybody puts in a little sweat equity over the next 3 years, I think it'll be beautiful. But as I said before, if you have any friends that are master gardeners and want to take on a project with us, we're needing that type of expertise.
This is Rick. For those of you who are interested, I know the question about the dirt trail came up. If you go over to Hines Park and walk the trail along Harry Hines Boulevard, we built that trail 6 years ago, I think, and we have done no maintenance to the tread itself. So if you want to go out there and look how a dirt trail can stay maintained when built correctly at the right angles with the correct runoffs and sheeting action, Harry Hines Park would be a great place. If you go up on the north side, it's not as pretty as the one along Harry Hines because that was a concrete and an asphalt dumping ground, so we had to kind of work around those things. But if you want to see how well a dirt trail can be maintained, take a look at Hines Park and walk along the Harry Hines Boulevard portion of it.
I also highly recommend the walking along the trails in the Trinity and the Fraser Dam recreation area. Once again, just an amazing project on the part of Groundwork Dallas, and I think you would get a good sense of the trails that they build there as well. So Dawn asks the question, how many designated parking spaces will be at the Quick Trip? Jason, do you recall? I don't recall.
Yeah, I answered in the chat. It's 18 spaces.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jason. I think our questions have slowed down. Thank you again for joining. Jared, thanks for putting together the presentation and driving. I appreciate everybody's participation. If you do have any other questions, don't hesitate to send an email to bachmanlakefriends@gmail.com. We have recorded this and we will be posting it on the Friends of Bachman Lake website. And you can, add your comments to that as well. We will also be doing a little summary letter of this meeting and look forward to getting the project started soon. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Gates, for joining, and thank you, Calvert.
Thank you. It was informative, and again, thank you for working with the neighborhoods, and look forward to keeping updated with your progress.
I appreciate it. Thank you for supporting us.